First keynote speaker this morning, Kylie Dunn, and we're very excited to have her with us today. Now, just a quick bit about Kylie and what she's going to talk about today. She's led a very diverse and successful, and some would say complicated life after 3 significant career changes, 2 failed marriages, and a nagging lack of fulfillment. She finally decided it was time to sort it out, and with a reputation of turning theory into practice, Kylie created her own self-development program, a year-long project of 30-day activities based on TED talks. Now, my year of TED took these ideas and turned them into 21 tangible activities, and she's going to discuss a few of these today, and it's going to include making choices and how important it is to practice self-compassion when you get it wrong, learning how to define your values and what success looks like for you, and understanding the reasons you might not be making your own decisions and how to fix that. And at the end, there will be a call to action for participants here today who are ready to give themselves permission to make one change in their lives, which will be captured on postcards. You can put a stamp on it and send it away maybe, and mailed out after the conference. So please welcome to the stage Kylie Dunn.
No? Yes, now you can. Excellent. So, I should probably start by explaining to you that I am a recovering judgmental perfectionist, people-pleasing control freak. I say recovering, but I wouldn't like to tell you how long it's been since my last relapse. And I always find it interesting when I call myself a control freak, because when I did my year of TED, when I went through and learned some things about myself, I realised that I'd actually been really passive in my life. I'd gone with the flow a lot, and I was allowing other people to make decisions for me. And that was largely because I didn't know what I wanted from my own life. So, just quickly check, are we going to get slides up? Okay, I can do it without them, that's okay. So I did a survey of people prior to doing this talk and asked them whether they knew what they wanted to be when they were at school having to make career decisions. 80% of people had no idea what they wanted to be. And out of those people, only, 23% still have no idea what they want to do. And the average age that people worked it out was 34 years old. And I like to talk about this because I think that we sort of get it a little bit wrong. You're being asked to make some decisions in your life at a point where you don't necessarily have the life experience yet to have discovered that thing that may make you happy, may make your heart sing. So I think it's a bit problematic to be asking you to make choices in a way where we're talking about it being a forever choice. Instead, I think we need to help you understand yourselves a little bit better, and then help you learn how to make better decisions based on that understanding. So it's problematic because you may not have the life experience, as I said, but the other reasons I think it's difficult is we don't really do forever jobs anymore. My parents' generation did. My dad left school at 15, became a boilermaker, and did that until he retired. And nowadays there still are people who do forever jobs, but a lot of us don't. As the introduction said, I've had 3 significant career changes, and I'm a long way from being retired, and I'm likely to have a few more when we go through. So I think that the world has changed. We have a lot greater ability now to be able to move beyond our birth situation. We have a lot more opportunity, a lot more options available. And I think that it's also really important that we acknowledge there are a lot of people who don't have a one thing. I call it being a polymath. A lot of people refer to it as being a multi-potentialist, but they're just big words that say there are a lot of people who just want to experience a lot of different things and get a lot of different skills and experiences in their lives. You don't have to settle for one thing. But it helps if you understand where you really want to be at the end. There, if the slides were working, is an interesting graphic that I had that basically says life isn't a straight path. You don't say this is where I am and this is where I want to be and you just go straight to it. Pretty much no one has that life. Everyone's life sort of goes like this. You get distractions, diversions, you get taken off in the wrong direction and then you end up somewhere. You may not end up at B. You may end up at D, you may end up at Z, you may end up somewhere else entirely. And that's okay. So what I want to talk about is why I think we struggle to make decisions in our lives. I'll talk about the problem, a couple of universal truths, share a little bit of my story, and then I'm going to give you some tools to help you work it out. So hopefully that's okay for you. So I think that the reason we have trouble making our own decisions is that we feel too much. And feel is an acronym for fear, expectations, envy, and a lack of clarity. We'll start with fear and its cousin anxiety. Most of us have a lot of fear or are controlled by fear when we're trying to make big decisions in our lives. And that makes complete sense because you don't want to get it wrong. You don't want to put a lot of time and energy into something that you end up going, well, I don't want to do this anyway. But that's sort of the wrong way of thinking about it. It makes sense though, because from a young age, tiny little kids, we're taught that the world is black and white. The world is right and wrong, it's good and it's bad. And that carries through into school because, of course, when you're learning things like maths and science, there are right and wrong answers. 2 + 2 = 4. There is no other solution, except in imaginary numbers or something, but we're not going to get into that. If you go through your life thinking that getting things wrong is bad, then it makes sense you think that wrong is a really negative emotion. You equate it with being bad, with being stupid, with being lazy, and all of those negative emotions. But wrong is one of the most important things in our lives. We learn and grow when we get things wrong. Yes, when you get things right, you also learn, but not as much as you do when something goes wrong. Think about it, when you have to problem solve, when you have to sit there and really work out how to get out of a crisis, that's where the real learning exists. And when you're getting things wrong, chances are it's because you're learning something new. So you're automatically in a situation where you're growing, where you're getting new skills. First universal lesson, we are all wrong a lot in our lives. You currently believe things that in 5 to 10 years' time, you're going to look back on and go, what was I thinking? Your life experiences will grow. You'll get more evidence, there'll be people that come into your life and challenge your ideas, and you will change your mind. This is how life works. So being wrong isn't being bad, it's just the way that we grow. It's the way that things happen. So we need to think about a better way of addressing that. That being wrong is just part of the process. You'll be wrong a lot, you'll also be right a lot. And if you can find a way to actually get that internal critic that's in your head that always plays through the things that you got wrong and never allows you to really celebrate the things you got right, if you can calm that down, it makes a big difference in your life. So yes, we get things wrong, but we grow and learn from them. Having said that, you're not going to grow and learn if you're not willing to take responsibility for your role in what went wrong and look at why that happened and how you can improve it in the future. I know, as the introduction said, I've been married and divorced twice. We will talk about that a little bit. I've had a number of different careers. I've had a number of destructive friendships even in my life, and I have a degree that I've never used. But I wouldn't change the crazy path that my life has taken for anything. I've learnt so much from all of my experiences. Cool. I've learnt so much from all of my experiences, and now I need to make this work. And all of those experiences have moved me to the place that I need to be, to a life that I'm really happy with. I've been hurt a lot and I've lost a lot. But quite frankly, I've also had an incredibly amazing life as well. So, expectations. Even before you're born, people are going to place expectations on you. Your parents have an idea about what they want your life to be. As you go to school, your teachers are going to have an idea about how well you're going to do in their class or how poorly you're going to do in their class. And of course, your friends, we all know about peer pressure. They place expectations on you about how they expect you to be and behave and what they expect you to do. The problem is that this happens from such a young age that often we haven't had the chance to understand what we really want, what's going to make us happy. So we can sometimes get distracted and just focus on keeping the other people in our lives happy and making our decisions based on that. And that can be incredibly negative, of course. So if you don't work out what you want, then other people's expectations for you are going to become your truth. And if you don't know what you want, then I guess that's a place to start, because it makes sense that if you're not making the decisions on where your life is going to go, someone else is going to be doing it for you. It has to go somewhere. So someone has to make those decisions. It would be far better if you could do that for yourselves. And it's not just the expectations of others, you also place expectations on yourself. You may have a theory that you want to be happy and you want to be successful. But if you don't clearly define what that looks like for you, then how do you know when you're going to get there? How do you know it when you see it? One of the ways you can do that is by looking at what others have and saying, oh yeah, well, I'd like that. But then that's going to possibly lead you to that horrible trait that we have as human beings of comparing ourselves to others and coming up short. Envy is probably one of the most negative emotions you can experience. It can destroy your happiness, it can destroy your self-esteem, and it can also destroy your relationships with other people. I'm sure that you all know one person in your life at least who seemingly has a fantastic life, and yet they're always looking at what other people have and they're not happy with what they have. So envy is an incredibly dangerous emotion for you to have, especially when you're trying to make decisions. And it's always easy to find someone else who's doing it better than you, especially in our hyper-connected world. But it's not really fair on yourself to judge yourself against other people, because we all have different goals. We have different skills and abilities, and we also all start from a different place in life. And when you're comparing just one little part of your life against a little part of someone else's life, you're not looking at the work they had to put into it, the sacrifices they had to make, their own natural skills and abilities, and of course their life situation. And quite often when we're envying other people, we're not really envying what they have, we're envying our perception of how happy they are, or we're envying the respect and the praise they're receiving from other people. Now, one of the activities I'm going to give you addresses this, so we'll talk about that a little bit later. But just remember that you aren't meant to be perfect. Nobody is meant to be perfect, and nobody is. And when you strive for perfection, and I'm not talking about striving to achieve, that's a different thing. Perfection is, I must win at all costs, and I can never fail. If you're doing that, then you're not going to have strong relationships with other people, because you're not being honest and authentic. And I can tell you, as a recovering perfectionist, it is very damaging. And it's only when you stop doing it you realise just how damaging it's been. The final one that I mentioned was a lack of clarity and lack of understanding about who you are and what you really want. And largely we aren't encouraged to do this. I think it's because previous generations weren't encouraged to do it either. And like I said, it's got to do with a bit of the mobility that we now have. We don't now have to live in our birth situation. We get that ability to move into different parts of society. We get to live overseas. We get to do all these things that previous generations didn't get to do. And so maybe it's just that our society hasn't caught up with the way we think about this. But I encourage you to do it. Some of you might be lucky enough that you actually you know that one thing that you want to do, and that's fantastic if you do, and I think it's always brilliant when you come across people who are just that focused and know that from a young age. And some of you might be fortunate enough to have someone in your life who has encouraged you to think about it, but it's not the norm. And so that lack of understanding means that the fear, the expectations, and the envy are going to control your decision making, so that you're not necessarily heading in the direction you want to go, because you don't know what that direction is. That was very much me. Like I said, I was a people-pleasing perfectionist. I thought that I'd been trying to work out what I wanted to do with my life for a long time, and I realised that I was never really trying, because I think I was scared to find out what the answer to that was. I was scared to find out that it was crap, or it was boring, or I wouldn't be able to achieve it. And there were also a few other things I was scared in learning about myself. I was scared that maybe I was a very weak and uninteresting human being. And why would you ever want to discover that was true? So what changed for me? Well, I think it was largely that I was the happiest I'd been in a very long time, and yet I still had this feeling inside that I used to refer to as my soul crying. It was a feeling of being completely unfulfilled. So I decided I finally needed to do something about it. I'll give you a really brief back history. I was born and raised in Wollongong, New South Wales, in a working class family. Pretty much everyone around me was either a blue collar worker or worked in retail. So steel workers, coal miners, all those sorts of things. And if you can imagine a world pre-internet, where if it's not in your direct vicinity or you don't see it on TV, then it really doesn't exist. My world was very small, so I didn't see a lot of opportunities outside of those sorts of jobs. I say I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up, but I always dreamt of doing something creative, being a writer, an artist, a designer. But of course, there was nobody in my world who let me know that that was a possibility. And I had to earn money, I had to be practical. So I did know two things about myself, and I always find it interesting to discuss this, particularly when I'm going to talk about my divorces in a moment. I always knew that I really wasn't bothered about getting married. I wasn't one of those girls that dreamt about walking down the aisle. And I knew I never wanted to be a mum. It was a role that I just never saw myself doing. And interestingly, nearly every single adult in my life, and I'm talking about even in my 30s, told me that would change. My biological clock would tick and you'll change your mind, you'll want kids. I'm 43 and that has never wavered. So just a little lesson to you that sometimes you do know exactly what you want or what you don't want, and other people aren't inside your head. So I went to university, I did a Bachelor of Arts Honours degree majoring in history, or as I refer to it, my dinner table degree, because unless you're going to teach, there's not a lot you can do with a history degree. Don't get me wrong, I loved it. I learnt a lot about critical thinking and how to challenge ideas, and it was a fantastic experience, but I've never really used it. So with that as my degree, I ended up going into administrative work, because that's what you do. And I had a number of admin jobs. I started a relationship with a man who was in the army. We got posted to Victoria. A few more admin jobs down there. He cheated on me, left me for another woman, and I sort of sat back and went, okay, so what happened with the last 4 years of my life? And it was really interesting. I sat down and went, I'm finally going to take control of my life. I need to take control back. I need to do that. And I should actually put the photos up, but it's going to take too long to sort out. I sat down and for the first time I really took control of my life. I gave myself 3 things to achieve in the next 12 months. I would jump out of an aeroplane attached to someone wearing a parachute. I would go to Italy and I would join the Air Force. And I did achieve all of those 3 things in 12 months. I became an officer in the Royal Australian Air Force, and I did that for 6 years, during which time I met and divorced my second cheating husband. And this is where I get to say we don't always learn from our mistakes, because when I look at it now, I actually married exactly the same person the second time as I did the first time, because I didn't take the time to work out what went wrong. And even though on the outside they looked like they were very different, they were actually exactly the same. So life gave me the lesson again. and I had to learn at that time again. I have fixed that. I've now been in a relationship with a man for 11 years who has never cheated on me, so life is good. In July 2010, we moved to Tasmania. I'd been working in state governments for a number of years, and we tree changed down here. And this is why I say I'd been the happiest I'd been in a long time. In June 2011, though, I still realised that I had that feeling of my soul crying, and I realised I needed to do something about that. I'm just looking at the time. I realised I needed to do something about it. So I decided that by July 2012, when I was going to turn 40, I needed to know what I wanted to give the world. And so I created my own self-development program, as was mentioned, and it was all based on TED Talks. Now, who knows what TED is? Who knows TED Talks? A few of you? Okay. If you don't know what it is, you need to go to the website. It's TED.com. They run a number of conferences, and they also license TEDx conferences throughout the world, and then they make all the talks freely available on the internet. And there are some incredibly inspirational and really insightful presentations that are on there. They all go for less than 20 minutes, so it's not a lot of your time that you have to give up. And I actually got to do my own TEDx talk at TEDx Hobart last year about my year of TED. So my year of TED was 21 30-day activities. They range from activities that were really simple to do, like better listening, less meat, which was about becoming a weekday vegetarian, and I'm trying to think, having an Asian diet. There were activities that were really about trying to improve my happiness. So an activity called More Happiness, slowing down, so stopping multitasking, doing gratitude journaling, a number of those things as well. There was also an activity in that group that was 30 days of vulnerability, which I finally learnt the skill of self-compassion. Self-compassion is just something that you all need to learn how to do. It's amazing when you can finally calm down that little inner critic a bit. Mine isn't entirely gone. I don't think they ever do entirely go, but she's not quite as much of a bitch as she used to be, so that's not too bad. There was a third group of activities that were about trying to help me connect more with other people. These were things like writing letters, really open, heartfelt letters to important people in my life. Thanks, praise and mindfulness, just thanking people and asking people how they wish to be thanked. Those sorts of activities. And they were really good for helping kick that perfectionist trait a bit as well. It's virtually impossible to be a perfectionist if you're being open and honest and authentic with other people. There were two activities that I did that helped push my introverted nature a bit, pushed me outside my comfort zone. The first was 30 Days of Fashion, and it was actually the first activity of my year of TED. So, you know how I say that we're wrong a lot? Sometimes when you're wrong in a really big way. I thought that 30 Days of Fashion would be a really nice, fun, interesting way to start this project. I thought, I'm just going to change my clothing a little bit more colour, and it'll be really interesting, and that'll be great. Day 2 days after having people compliment me on my clothing choices, I had a complete mental breakdown. It was horrid. I was in tears, crying, sobbing. I couldn't cope with it. And I should have known this because I knew that as an introvert I used my clothes to hide. And yet I seemed to forget that when I was doing the project. If I hadn't told people I was doing it, if I hadn't started blogging the experience, I likely would have stopped on day 2. But because I told everybody, I had this accountability, and I couldn't not do it because I was a perfectionist, I couldn't fail. So I had to keep pushing through, and I'm incredibly grateful for the fact that I set that up and that I didn't stop myself from doing it at that point. Then there were activities that were about the core of the project: drive, choice, being wrong, those sorts of activities that were about really working out who I am, about what I need from the world and what I want to give the world. And those activities have helped me change my life. Now, I do talk about the fact that as I went through the project, I realised that it aligned really well with the Wizard of Oz, which is the reason that I have the shoes on. This isn't a fashion choice, okay? They are there for a reason. I realised that what I wanted out of the project was actually the same thing that Dorothy and her companions wanted. I wanted the wisdom to understand who I was and what to do with that knowledge. I wanted a heart so I could be more compassionate to myself and other people. I wanted the courage to make the changes that I needed to make in my life and live the life I wanted. And then lastly, I wanted to find my way home. I wanted to discover my voice and to discover my authentic self. And what I realised was I could have done that at any point in my life. I just had to give myself permission and trust that I knew what I needed anyway. So how does this all relate to you? Well, there are 2 exercises that I did that you guys are going to get a workbook and you're going to have the ability to do. The first of those activities is about values, defining your values and understanding really who you are as a person. I'd never done this for myself until I did 30 Days of Drive, and when I did, all these things suddenly clicked into place about why I felt so frustrated in particular jobs and why I was so unhappy with things where I really sort of should have been happy, because if you look at society's idea of success, I was very successful, but I wasn't. And it's because when I worked out my values, I worked out that my top values are making a difference, equality, fairness, and I was largely in organisations that weren't necessarily displaying those values. When you work in the Air Force, when you work in the military, it is a very sexist environment. That's going to take them a long time to get over. When you have to walk in the room as a female and always prove yourself, it gets very tiring. And when equality and fairness are your prime values, it makes sense that that's going to be very frustrating for you. So I strongly encourage you to work out what your values are. It's about defining your top 10 values. And the reason that they're valuable for you to have is when you're making decisions about an organisation you might work for, or even people that you're going to have in your life, you can see whether they're really in opposition with the values that you actually hold very dear. So that's one of the activities. The other one is about defining what success looks like for you in the most important parts of your life. Success statements are just that, it's an explanation of success. I defined 10 areas, but you'll have space in the workbook if you want to add things. So they're things like career, finance, relationships, family, mental health, physical health, those sorts of areas, and it's about defining a couple of sentences. Now, there is a YouTube video on the page where you download the workbook that will explain all of this in a lot more detail. But the reason that they're really good for you is that they help you in your decision making. It'll be quite clear to you when you define these things whether an opportunity is going to lead you towards your idea of success or take you away from it. Because remember, this is your idea of success, nobody else's. And they're also really valuable in identifying where you might have a bit of a conflict between your concept of success. Let's just say if you say that you want to be in a career where you work in community services, but you also want to be a millionaire, those 2 things are probably not going to match. So you get to work out whether you've got some misalignment there as well. And then of course there is envy. If you know what success looks like for you, not for your parents, not for your friends, family, teachers, not for society in general, but for you, then you can stop comparing yourself to others when they've achieved things that you don't want for yourself anyway. And even if you do want it for yourself, it helps you look at it a little bit more broadly, because they may have had to sacrifice something that you don't want to sacrifice in order to get where they got to. Now, there are 2 other things that I will mention, 2 tips, I guess, 2 other characteristics that I think you need if you're going to be owning your own life. And number 1 is that you need to give yourself permission to own your own life. It is essential for you to give yourself permission to own your life. After all, it's yours. And I know that it's an incredibly scary thing to do. When I made this change in my life and I changed the direction, I left my job and I started a business and I started doing crazy things like standing up on stage and talking to people, I came to accept that fear is a constant companion in my world now. It scares crap out of me doing stuff like this. But I made a decision that this is what I want to do with my life. And so I just have to accept that fear is there and do it anyway. You need to give yourself permission. You need to own it. And it's scary to own those decisions because what happens when you fail, and remember I said you're going to get it wrong, you're going to fail. You have no one to blame but yourself, but that's looking at failure the wrong way. There's a lovely quote from Richard St. John, who has a TED Talk, The 8 Traits to be Great. And he talks about the fact that failure is fertiliser for success. And that's the reason it feels like shit. And that's the way you have to look at it. Failure is just telling you that you don't yet have the skills or the experience or the knowledge to do what you want to do. It's not telling you you can't. It's just telling you you have to learn something else before you can get to where you want to be. And that's the important thing to remember. The other thing is courage. You need courage. And chances are, you are more courageous than you believe you are. I thought I needed to learn how to be courageous. What I didn't realise was I was already incredibly courageous, and every single person I've ever met is more courageous than they give themselves credit for. So you need to just be willing to accept that fear and push through. Be brave, because if you get it wrong, that's okay. You can just learn from that lesson, grow and move on. Now look, there's a chance that some of you sitting here today are looking at me going, is she ever going to stop talking? And you may be thinking this is crap. And quite frankly, I may have thought the same thing when I was your age sitting out there because I didn't know what I wanted from my life. But even if you're thinking that, I will encourage you to do the exercises anyway. If you want to do it really quickly, it'll take about an hour to do, and you may realise something about yourself that you didn't know. If you realise just one thing, then an hour isn't a lot of a commitment to make. If you want to do it in more detail, it is going to take longer, but you don't have a deadline for it. Okay, so now you're going to be given a postcard, and we probably need to bring the house lights up for this. And Joe and the guys are going to hand some postcards out. So the postcards, Joe and the guys do at this sort of event, are for you to fill in, and they will be mailed back to you in a couple of weeks. And the reason that this is important is it's far too easy to walk away from an event like this and forget everything that you learned. To be inspired, but then to not take any action. So we'd like you to fill in 3 things. So the box is, of course, for you to put your name and address so it can be mailed back to you. And the 3 things we'd like you to have, and I will find the slide for this one so that it's up on the screen, but the first one is from this talk. What is the one thing you are going to give yourself permission to do? Okay, so the first thing is, what is the one thing you're going to give yourself permission to do? Number 2 is, what is something that you've learned from the conference so far? And number 3 is, what's been the best thing at the conference so far? Now we know that you have a number of sessions that will continue through today, and you will be able to give feedback to Joe's team. If there's something that you come across today that you really loved and you want them to know about, then definitely give them that feedback. But we'd like you to complete this before you leave the room and chuck it in the post box up the front. Because again, it'll be really easy for you to walk out of this room and forget to fill in the postcard, okay? So we have, yes, I'll get the slide up on the screen, hopefully, if that comes back up, and I'll chuck it up for you. But just remember that this will be a good accountability tool for you. So here are all the slides you missed. All right, the 3 questions.
Do you guys need pen?
And while you're filling that out, if any of you have any questions about the stuff that I've been speaking about, please feel free to ask as well. The main career changes that I had, when I initially went to university, I had contemplated becoming a teacher. That was, as I went through university, the whole 4 years, I planned on doing a dip ed and staying on and becoming a teacher, and I didn't. So I went into admin work. When I left admin work and went into the Air Force, I went in as an air defence officer, which is basically sitting at a scope and controlling Hornets, controlling F-18 aircraft. And I did that for about 7 months and hated it. And I managed to get posted to a project where I became an information and records manager. And I did that for pretty much my entire RAF career, and then for 7 years in government. And then when I left government, I've since started my own business. So that's sort of the progression of how that went through.
Any other questions? Hello.
They're all focused on doing what I've asked them to do.
All right. Okay. Can I just quickly say too, just when they've finished their postcards and they're putting them in the box, where Dakota's standing, you see there's a yellow envelope. Again, the fantastic evaluation forms that you so love filling out for every one of these sessions. If you could please also fill one of those out and just leave them there, we'll put them back in the yellow envelope as well. So don't put those ones in the postcard box, they're separate ones. But if you could also just quickly fill one of those out too, that would be great.
And did you get the little card that has the download? Yep, good. Because there's some more of those next to the box as well.
So if there's no more questions at all for Kylie, well, I'll say first of all, Kylie, really appreciate you coming and having a chat with us. Thank you very much. That was fantastic. I'm sure everybody's enjoying filling out their postcards. Give a round of applause for Kylie. As a token of our appreciation, we have a small gift for you. Thank you very much. You didn't see me carrying that in before the presentation. So
I honestly didn't. I was focused.
Well, thank you very much, and really appreciate your time here today. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you all for being a very listening audience, although maybe the late night sort of made you all a little bit quiet.
They were all in bed before 12. Every single one of them.
I'm sure they were.
I was there to witness it. All right.